Hello. Welcome back to yet another essay-style video. Except, well, there's no video part to this one, is there? Right, so the topic of this month's video, being a licensed film and all, is entirely too difficult to get the clips for, and you can forget trying to download this movie legally, for my own personal use after purchasing it on Amazon Prime, Google Play, and several other platforms. I wasted like $50, but still couldn't get the film. So, thank you every single company for saying, you don't really own the thing that you own. That's oh boy, that's something for another time. We'll get to that. This part is like half scripted, but we'll get into the regular video soon. So thank you Warner Brothers, DC Entertainment, and the YouTube copyright system. At least this way I can still make money on this video. I bring you the first ever audio-only video essay of mine. Please don't worry, next month we'll be right back to normal. And stay tuned, I've got several announcements that are coming in this video. Anyways, let's get into it. Christopher Nolan is one of the most talented and lauded filmmakers of his generation, influencing so many areas of the modern film industry, from being one of the first filmmakers to use IMAX cameras to being the first filmmaker to break an IMAX camera during filming. From inventing the tone of the modern superhero film to proving that a good cast can define the image of a character for a lifetime. There is absolutely no doubt that Christopher Nolan is a filmmaker in the truest sense of the word, creating art with every single project of his. Even his least loved films offer a brand new and interesting view on a certain type of story that we just haven't seen before, and nowhere is that more true than in the Dark Knight trilogy, a series that to this day outlives the popularity and prominence of all other contenders. However, despite these facts, his most popular work remains to this day to be The Dark Knight, specifically, a film that seems never to be beaten in its influence and laudable achievements. Now, I myself adore this film, but it certainly has stuck in the back of my mind that there's something off. Of all three Batman films, or actually, of all Batman films past, present, and most likely future, I'm sorry, Robert Pattinson, I'm very excited for your movie, but people are still going to compare your version of anything to the Dark Knight trilogy, so I feel bad. Everything is compared to this one particular version of this character, and of course, his most formidable nemesis. Heath Ledger's Joker has outlived the actor by about 12 years at this point, and he's still often cited as one of cinema's greatest portrayals of a villain, really of all time. While I certainly don't disagree with that assessment, there does seem to be something of a lack of attention put on either Batman Begins or The Dark Knight Rises, in spite of being just as high quality in their storytelling. This topic really could be an entire video in and of itself, and I haven't even begun to delve into the depths of this weird discrepancy between the three films, but that's for another time. I'm probably going to come back to it eventually. Instead of that, today we're going to discuss the rather obvious and surface level, if you look at it, political messages of The Dark Knight Rises, the influences that brought it about, and its consistent ability to apply continuously even into our modern day. Now, while I'm absolutely certain that Christopher Nolan has no particular compunctions about American politics one way or the other, especially in his films, the messages and ideological iconography strike an ever more sensitive and prevalent chord today than even at its original time of creation. Now, I'm not going to expect that everyone watching this video agrees with me on every single point, or really even one point at all, but this video is an effort on my end to bring this film back into the discussion of Batman media and possibly put an understated theme into the limelight that it really hasn't fully enjoyed before. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, especially my more recent Thanksgiving and Christmas videos, you'll know I do have very strong political and religious beliefs, and I believe that I've made them clear. I haven't beaten you over the head with them, but I've certainly made my point known. And hopefully all of you out there understand that having these views doesn't stop me from appreciating a thought-provoking, insightful opinion that might rebut my own. Sociopolitical discourse is how we can actually effect lasting change, after all, and this nation was built on discourse and disagreements. At the moment of recording this is shaping up to be my longest and most in-depth video yet, so please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications. On top of that, consider supporting me on Patreon. It costs less than a coffee a day to do so, and head on over to cnp-productions.com/store and pick yourself up a shirt in men's and women's sizes, or a sticker sheet with 20 stickers. Every little bit counts, and if I'm going to continue to make projects like this, I'm going to need every single cent I can get. It's just the way it works. With all that out of the way, thank you, and let's jump into this truly terrifying beast of a topic. Now, we opened the scene at a memorial service for Harvey Dent. This first scene in front of the courthouse could just as easily be the week after Harvey's death as it would have been 8 years later. Commissioner Gordon, the most honest man in Gotham, is forced to keep a lie living and blame Batman for the death of Harvey and his heinous crimes. Gotham needs a symbol, however flawed it is, to be the face of law, order, and safety in this city, and sadly, both Jim and Batman know that there is no other way to keep all of those criminals locked away than to prop up Harvey, a murderer himself. This is the earliest place in this film we begin to see those moral fibers fray. Now, from this, we cut to one of the most iconic scenes in the film. We're low to the ground in a field somewhere probably in Eastern Europe, likely one of the many Slavic nations and former members of the USSR, and we'll get back to the USSR connection later. On a side note, the CIA agent, please look this up, the CIA agent in this film, who also plays Littlefinger, and I'm upset that I know that, looks exactly like Tucker Carlson. It is uncanny. The entire time I was watching this movie, I could not get that out of my head. Speaking of which, the classic American bravado that we see this CIA glowy present, while it's somewhat unfair, is no less accurate to the mindset of the average American federal agent. Rather easily manipulated, this agent is tricked into inviting Bane onto his plane. When interrogation goes awry, Bane makes his presence known, and we begin to understand the actual threat of this masked man. Now, while we have certainly had more grand entrances for villains, this one in particular stands out to me as one of the more memorable entrances. When we first see Bane, we don't even actually know that it is him. Just like his ideological narrative requires, he presents himself as just another face in the crowd, another target taken in by this Fed, until he begins to speak. Here, we see the first signs of his agenda, his politics, and his ideology. He and his people are not important individually. They believe this system that they come from sees them as nothing more than mice in a maze, cogs in the machine of capitalistic industry and greed. With Bane crashing the battle bus and quite ingeniously faking the death of Dr. Pavel, the first stage of the plan is complete. The fire rises. With a dramatic shift in music from the rather fast-paced and increasingly suspenseful score to the calm and quiet sounds of the evening as we fly over Gotham, we're brought into another entirely different Gotham than we have seen throughout this whole series. With the sun setting on Gotham, the sun is also setting on this era of unprecedented peace in the city. With plummeting crime rates and grand parties abound, this city, now without fear, is yet to face its darkest hour. This Gotham is more affluent and peaceful than really any depiction of Gotham we've seen up to this point. Save, perhaps for the days of the great Adam West, but Also, that was filmed in California. The party thrown in honor of Harvey Dent Day is a perfect encapsulation of the state of the city, and a particular idea of what the political structure that Bane believes exists looks like. We get an interesting and rather direct parallel that can be drawn from the Dent Act in Gotham and the real-world example of the broken windows theory. The broken window theory, which was implemented by Mayor Rudy Giuliani during his tenure as mayor of New York, was originally developed by James Q. Wilson and George L. Kelling in 1982. The theory states that visible signs of crime, antisocial behavior, and civil disorder encourage and foster an urban environment that propagates crime as a whole. The theory also suggests that policing methods that target minor crimes like vandalism, loitering, public drinking, jaywalking, and, not paying your travel fares or your tickets, they help to create an atmosphere of law and order. New York's crime rates were at the lowest they had been since 1965 under Mayor Giuliani, and under the Dent Act in Gotham, we see a parallel. Now, a question is beginning to arise surrounding the Dent Act, namely, does it serve a purpose anymore? Now, the mayor presents a speech that shows there are a substantial number of people who believe that now that organized crime has been utterly dismantled within the city, why would we need such laws as the Dent Act? He defends it on the principle that the law is proactive and preventative, not overkill, especially in a city like Gotham. Simultaneously, he demonizes the man truly responsible for this unprecedented safety. A man who understood that people need dramatic examples to be shaken out of apathy. A man who risked his life time and again to prove that there is good in the hearts of all men, and that good can prevail. His statements on the Dent Act make it seem as if the city begins to believe that vigilance is no longer necessary, and that because it's not a problem now, well, why would we need to keep our guard up? After the mayor has had his speech, Gordon comes to the podium, almost setting the record straight, but sadly choosing to keep hold of this lie in service of a higher purpose. Despite his loyalty and service, the mayor plans on replacing him with a more manageable or malleable presence as opposed to Gordon's strength. From here, we intercut with the introduction of both Selina and Bruce. Beginning with the man himself, we see that he takes no visitors, he barely eats food, and almost never leaves his room, let alone the house. His board members haven't heard from him in almost as long as Batman has been gone. They all have their worries and their theories, but, well, no one actually knows the state of the man himself, save for Alfred. Simultaneously, we're introduced to Selina Kyle, disguised as a catering staff member to gain access to Bruce's private chambers. As her curiosity temporarily gets the better of her, Bruce is allowed to sneak up on her and chooses to alert her to his presence with an arrow inches in front of her face. Insert esoteric arrow reference about failing the city. This is possibly one of the only times in the film that we are given a genuine reaction from our feline femme fatale, a rare sight indeed. Their rather playful banter over the topic of Selina stealing Martha's pearls is entertaining if, somewhat understated, as Bruce's attachment to those pearls is something that any Batman fan, even someone who's only watched the films or only played games, would understand as integral to his character. Selina embodies yet another important archetype in the political structure of this film. She is, by all accounts, simply a cunning individual who knows how to get what she wants. She doesn't come from means. In fact, she despises those who have means, but simultaneously is envious of what she cannot attain, whether by choice or circumstance. She is, quite simply, the personification of the kind of person that Bane seeks to control through his socio-political machinations. She's the perfect embodiment of the modern socialist college student. As Bruce attempts to reason with Selina, asking for the pearls back nicely, he also lets his guard down and is rapidly and very depressingly dismantled by simply kicking his cane out from under him. In this one scene alone, we realize he is a shadow of the man he once was. Gone are the days of Batman, always vigilant, seeing through everyone's lies and reading their movements like a book, but rather a sad injured and perpetually sorrowful veteran who loses the will to continue day by day. In her getaway, we see another archetypal example of the political elite presented in this film. Lustful and vain, two things that Selena is a professional at exploiting to her own ends, Congressman Gillies is a proxy for really every elitist politician that exists, but what I was assuming was Republican politicians. Now, we cut away from the party to Jim Gordon and John Blake, our fourth protagonist, discussing the disappearance of Congressman Gillies, who we just saw with Selena, and who apparently didn't make it home last night. Gotham is living in an unprecedented time of peace, so much so that even the police are running out of work, as there's a generation that has never known the fear of walking down a dark alley and losing everything that you hold dear. And this generation of good times is slowly killing them, even if they can't actually see it yet. This city is living on borrowed time that's really almost up. While the crime rate is down, so is the economic prosperity of this city. You see, this film was made in the years following the 2008 housing crisis, which even to this day has not completely ended, and in 2012, when this film was released, hadn't even begun to make any significant turns. Even if it all looks shiny and polished, there's this indomitable, corrosive nature to the city's existence that is slowly killing it. Cutting back to Selena, we enter a dive bar in a back alley somewhere. I really wish we got another shot of the Narrows, but oh well. As the story begins to unfold, we find that Daggett's plan, quite selfish and elitist as it is only just beginning to take shape. With an impressive display of cunning and martial skill, Selena very slyly escapes the scene of the escalating police encounter. Oddly enough, the police are being rather easily overpowered for the number of them that show up. As the criminals run, they lead chase, heading down an alley and into the sewers, with the police, led by Gordon, very soon to follow. Now, absolutely a trap, we see that Bane is behind the attack himself, and most likely behind Daggett as well. Daggett fulfills the role of being a puppet of industry, funding this revolution really for his own gain. When we catch back up with Selena, we see her morals are really almost non-existent, but her loyalty is unchallenged, protecting her friend from a man whose wallet they stole, even taking their watch as they leave. Again, she relishes in the chance to steal from those she deems worthy of stealing from. If they have something that she doesn't, she's going to take it. She deserves it after all, because that person represents what she isn't and what she doesn't like and what she can't be, and she's envious of their status and greedy of their means. The next moment, we see Bruce Wayne returning from his reclusive exile, attending a charity ball. Now, he displays yet another important socio-political point in the conversation with Miranda Tate about the hypocritical nature of these types of events and the people who put them on. These civilized people, they're schemers. Like in real life, politicians on both sides, they're not really passionate about anything. They change with the wind and only make a statement when it suits them. Corporations don't actually celebrate progressive movements and holidays like Black History Month or Pride Month or Juneteenth, or really any of them because they believe in the message, but rather their public image gets that extra coat of polish and helps them to stave off the visible degradation of their morals and of our culture at large. Still, Miranda surprises Bruce, presenting what seems to be an alternative to the norm, someone who looks at the world like he does, who sees the world for what it is and wants to change it for the better, not for their own benefit, or so she claims. Miranda sees Bruce for who he actually is, a man of means, but also of morals. He represents the ideal capitalist businessman, one that doesn't take the easy way out and always pays attention to those who need help, whether in his own company or throughout the city, the Wayne Foundation. Bruce embodies the conservative ideal of capitalism in this scene. He never takes the easy way out. His labor is not outsourced to slave camps in China, and he's willing to put his own personal fortune on the line, even if it means financial ruin, so long as it can help others. Unlike all of his other counterparts in the elite business world, and really, therefore, Christopher Nolan's portrayal of the elites in society as a whole, Bruce means what he says. He has honest beliefs about the world and everyone in it. On the contrary, Selina embodies the progressive cultural Marxist ideology ever more popular in the world today, and believes that Bruce and his fortune makes him like all of the rest, corrupt, opportunistic, and apathetic to the world. She has absolute moral authority in her view because she has less than those around her and believes that it should belong to her. She prays for the day that this system falls, believing that everyone deserves what they do not yet have, but that no one deserves to have all of it. She is, for all intents and purposes, a prodigy of our current political left in the world as a whole, but more recently and far more prevalently in the United States today. Almost 40 minutes into the movie, we're finally reintroduced to Lucius Fox, the man who actually gets things done at Wayne Enterprises. Now, like Bruce, he lives in the corporate and economic world, but he does not play their games. He has morals, unlike his predecessor, who we see in Batman Begins. However, unlike Bruce, Lucius understands that you have to be willing to take risks to keep the business innovating and profitable. While Lucius believes that their fusion reactor would be a benefit to society and would return Wayne Enterprises' investments, Bruce realizes the need for caution with these kinds of advancements. Just like the scientific marvel of splitting the atom, nuclear energy has the potential to actually solve the world's clean energy woes, but simultaneously, it has the potential to destroy the world as we know it if mistreated. Now, I'm not making an argument surrounding nuclear energy at this point. Generally, I think nuclear energy is a very good thing if you look at the actual safety procedures and realize that the 2 times that a nuclear facility failed, it was because of negligence on the part of the engineers and the government as a whole. So they're not the best examples of why not to use nuclear energy, but that's an entirely different discussion. With great power, nuclear or otherwise, comes great responsibility, as yet another old wise man once said. Bruce, embodying more conservative symbology in this scene, is very even-tempered in wielding this kind of power. However, as seen with the conservative corporate heads and politicians in the real world, not acting can be just as dangerous for conserving a culture as actively fighting against it. Now, Lucius shows a similar display of wisdom over strength in their scene in the R&D department. Just like Officer Blake and Commissioner Gordon, Lucius still believes in the Batman. They all see that this peace cannot and will not last forever, and if there ever was a time to prepare for the storm to come, now is the time. There's only one thing that can stop the ideology that Bane seeks to spread and use to uproot society, and that is the Batman and the ideals that he is supposed to represent. Before we continue with this long enough video already, this god-forsaken length of a script, like, I'm serious, this script is 21 pages, over 6,800 words. I spent way too much time on this. Anyway, before we continue, what I was going to say was, the first episode of the Christian Neises show, while I had planned on it coming out in February, absolutely, there is a likelihood that it will come out at the beginning of March. Now, why is this? Well, for one, this entire month I have been swamped with notes for this movie in particular. I spent 4 hours taking notes and had only gotten through 41 minutes of the film. I have so much time and effort put into this, on top of course, having schoolwork and regular life and having to do all those sorts of things. So, the first episode of the Christian Neises show, if it does not come out in the last weekend of February, will come out sometime during the first week of March. As I've stated before, this is going to be a live radio show style broadcast where I have a set of topics that I want to discuss, and at a certain part of the broadcast, I will switch over and allow for you, the viewer, to call in. So please do call in. I'm very excited to be talking to all of you out there. For the first episode of the Christian Neises show, I am going to be building a PC live on stream, which is something I've needed to do for a while, but have only recently been able to get all of the parts for. So, again, prepare for the first episode of the Christian Neises show. If it is not during the last week of February, it will be during the first week of March, so please put that amount of time on your calendars somewhere. Again, I'm sorry that it has taken this long, but here we are. So how about we just jump back into the episode now, all right? Okay. Bruce is exceedingly reluctant to continue going as a person, let alone becoming Batman again. But at the same time, he also recognizes the slowly increasing need for the Batman's return. As such, he steps back into the role and takes up the mantle for the first time in nearly a decade for him, and is not even close to prepared for the fight ahead of him. In this section of the film, we see another idea that, while perhaps not being the majority, is still a very significant idea in conservative circles. It's a common and prideful idea that simply because we beat the communists before and the Soviet Union fell, that we can do so again, with minimal actual effort and with the same tired icons of the past. Conversely, the Marxist progressive ideology of the left has been mutating under the surface for decades at this point, shifting and shaping itself into something even more extreme than times past, slowly heating up the pot on the frog that is Western civilization. If you want to look at the League of Shadows as an emblem of leftism, you would see Ra's al Ghul's era of the League being closer to that of what the USSR had been, this clandestine seeming force to the Western world. Now, there was certainly a lot of propaganda on our end that gave us a particular view of what the USSR was. I highly suggest you go and watch the interviews with Yuri Bezmenov to see really just how devious and underhanded the USSR had been, as well as how secretive they had tended to act. As Alfred says in the film, any man that's too extreme for Ra's al Ghul is not to be trifled with. Of course, Bruce is going to rebut that with, "Well, I didn't know I was known for trifling with criminals." Alfred responds, "That was then, and you can strap up your leg and put your mask back on, but that doesn't make you what you were." Through this interaction, we get yet another growing sentiment within conservative circles that says we should let society devolve into civil war more than it has already if you've watched anything from the past 2 years. Last time a civil war happened, the Republicans in the North won, so we can do it again because we have history on our side. And the last time we got in the ring with socialism and communism, we beat them too. I mean, yes, absolutely. And perhaps we could do that again, but conservative tactics are very outdated and far too pronounced to be effective in today's world. If conservatives fail to keep up, they're going to be caught unprepared, and then will be extremely easy to discredit, to cast out, and ultimately to break under the weight of this new left. Switching scenes, we pick back up on the setting sun in Gotham, as the Gotham Stock Exchange, filmed in the actual financial district of New York, is full to the brim with people using other people's money to gamble away livelihoods. It's a chaotic bullpen, not unlike the prison that we see later on, except instead of hope for freedom, their hopes lie in the ever-shifting and unpredictable marketplace. Now, we get a nice little Harvey Dent joke while we wait for this scene to build. We see several examples of the haves treating the have-nots like they are lesser than, invisible even. Clean my shoes, wash my floors, bring me my food. Here, take some money I'm gonna throw at you, that's your pay. But just when everyone's back is turned and their guard is down, that's when Bane strikes. Again, we get a rather blatant example of Bane's ideology as the Resurgent League makes their presence known. Now, while I could simply say that we live in a society and that this is another blatant example of leftism, there's far more to this scene than capitalism. Let's just take a second to discuss the backdrop of this movie and the politics of the time. If you want a look at the Occupy Wall Street movement that takes into effect the full breadth of the events of the time, then I suggest the Business Insider video on the event. In short, the 2008 recession in the United States had absolutely decimated the economy, and the financial sector of the country wasn't really doing anything substantial to curb those effects. Now, while promises were made and policies were proposed, no real change would be made for almost a decade following the start of the recession. This left hundreds of thousands, if not millions, across the US with a certain anger burning inside. And from that anger, they formed occupation protests across the nation, beginning with Occupy Wall Street. Jumping back into the movie, immediately after Bane's presence is seen, we see the police respond in force, rolling a veritable army up to the Continental. I guess this was during John's retirement phase. After a short conversation about how inflation works, the police rulebook on hostage negotiations is taken control, page by page. Insert esoteric diehard bit about the step-by-step hostage situations. Pulling a classic Inside Man, the hostage takers blend with the hostages before zipping off in their bikes, leading a chase. And finally, as the sun sets on the city and the night descends from above, its emissary covers the area in darkness, and through darkness, fear. He is here. Abandoning all other concerns, the city tunes in to hear about the Batman's return. Even the police stop hunting the criminals who just stole the entire GSE and everyone's crypto portfolios, just in order to hunt the Batman. Catching up to Bane's two accomplices, but failing to catch the man himself, Batman realizes he's too late to stop Bane from right-click saving everyone's NFTs to his homework folder. With the police surrounding him, the music swells and we begin to remember the glory days of the Bat, leading cops in a wild chase across rooftops, flashing back to Batman Begins. After being used by a powerful globalist, Selina, the prime millennial leftist of this story, complains to director Krennic, asking to see the manager. Realizing that she's in over her head, Bruce saves Selina's ass, gets a cool rooftop fight scene for the first time almost an hour into the film. And even here, we can see that he's not even close to being as fast or as strong as he used to be. But even still, he takes time to reinforce his moral code. Bruce deftly avoids having to face the antagonist of this film by way of, bass boosting his way out of here in the Bat. Of course, after simping over another gamer girl who plays the same games as he does, he heads back to the cave. Here, we get another great political allegory conversation between Bruce and Alfred about big government and the misuse of power. While Alfred brings up a very valid point, and clearly just wants a better life for Bruce than this, Bruce remains accurate in his assessment. Every single time an overreach of government power has been an option, it has always been taken. Governments never willingly give up their strength, and to give them something as powerful as what Bruce has at his fingertips, like a surveillance system or any of his millions of different gadgets and tools, that would be to turn Gotham into a police state. Simultaneously, we do reinforce the idea that Bruce, and metaphorically the ideology of the conservative right, does not have what it takes anymore to do what's necessary to conserve the nation. We care far more about appearing conservative than, actually acting like one. Bruce's ideology hasn't grown to recognize the ever-shifting face of Bane's leftism and its true strength. After another chunk of Bruce simping over Harvey's gamer girl who chose him over Bruce, Alfred says TBH and Bruce kicks him from the Discord call. After that, we move to Lucius and Bruce bringing Miranda into the fray, and we get yet more political philosophy, but this time on how to handle the idea of progress. Is progress the means, or is progress the ends? From here, we move from the reactor to the boardroom, and we get a glimpse of how the elites treat their own after they've lost their Chinese social credit scores. Immediately following that, we get a reporter asking a very charged and leading question. How does it feel to be one of the people, Mr. Wayne? Directly after that, we switch to a very impactful scene, and one of the best examples of Yuri Bezmenov's term, useful idiots. Bane has been using these fools, these corporate elitists, just the same way he's been using his army, only while his army is devoted to him, being trained up and radicalized to his way of life and his destructive ideology, these useful idiots, these elitists, have had their strings pulled by thinking that they have all the power in this situation. Of course, until they don't. For all of his bravado, Director Krennic dies whimpering like a Russian mobster's dogs. From this, we move back to Bruce and Blake, and after a quick explanation by Bruce on what a mask is used for in any context and, why Batman exists, because everyone forgets these characters exist in a reality where comic books tend not to exist, we do get another scene of Batcat, and I'm really upset that I don't entirely hate the phrase Batcat. It's the official-ish name, and it's, for whatever reason, not the worst thing that they've come up with, and it kind of pains me to say that. But anyway, Selina begins to gloat before realizing that even now she doesn't have what she wants and doesn't even have what she thinks she should, which Bruce does, when she says, "The rich don't even go broke like the rest of us." However, enticed by that ever-existing hope that she could maybe, possibly, potentially, hopefully, finally get her hands on her salvation through the clean slate protocol, she reluctantly accepts Bruce's terms to lead him to Bane. After a rather short but entertaining fight with, quote, not your average brawlers, and a particularly skillful display of Bruce's hubris, Selina once again gives into her nature as an opportunist and survivalist, betraying Bruce. For the first time coming face to face with Bane, these two titans, these two ideologies, come to blows. Without a second thought, Bruce is ready to fight, but before he can, Bane lets on that he is far more informed than Bruce was ever expecting. We begin again with the political allegories that certainly I might just be reaching for with my absolute galaxy brain here, but here we go. Immediately, Bane recognizes that Bruce is not nearly as powerful as he once was expecting. Peace has cost you your strength. Victory has defeated you. The conservatives of the 20th century beat the USSR, both fiscally and in almost every single proxy war that was fought. When the wall fell and the USSR dissolved, there was no globe-threatening enemy anymore. People let their guards down, society became more classically liberal, and through the 90s, there was a general sense that the world was, more or less, peaceful for the first time in potentially ever. When threatened by an obvious and public regime bent on the destruction of the Western world, it's easy to see the antagonist in front of you, and easy to get people behind you to fight them. Propaganda, covert operations, narrative spinning, it's all useful. But in the case of someone like Bane, when the enemy knows your playbook, in fact, read the exact same one and is entirely unfazed when you use your tired, century-old tactics against a radically transformed ideology, barely recognizable as an evolution of the one you fought before, what hope do you have to defeat them in the same way? The modern subversive leftist ideology of progression, or revolution rather, eternal and always working, has had its groundwork laid for over half a century. You can read the works of early theorists and creators of this movement as early as the mid-60s, watching the slow build and shifting focus from overt to covert, upsetting the established order of shared morals and values. Even if you're simply hate watching this video at this point, you have to agree that there is really no accurate traditional conservative voice out there in education, in traditional media sources, and strikingly few in public office. This buildup and slow erosion began under the structures, the institutions that our society has relied on for generations. Like Bruce with his armory, the cultural and moral foundations that our nation was founded on have been subverted, have been stolen from us, and are now being utilized for the very thing that we swore to protect the nation, or in Bruce's case, the city, from. Even with all of this information, the truth readily available at our fingertips, right-wing mouthpieces in the media and rhinos will still go out there every morning and talk about fighting this thing like it's 1985. Even with all of their tools taken from them, they still want to make it look like they have a chance to fight back. Not until they have truly lost everything will they understand the full gravity of the situation that those, like myself, have been seeing for years now. And even then, they're never going to acknowledge that those of us who were concerned about these things were correct all along, so long as it means that they can save face with the rest of their corrupt friends. With Selena, for the first time understanding exactly how grave of a situation they are in now and what she did to contribute to it, she tries to escape. She tries to fly away, to disappear, hoping to never be known for what she did or who she was. Think about it this way. When the United States falls into the hands of corrupt bureaucrats, when our constitutional freedoms are in tatters, and there exists a ruling class whose cult of personality is so powerful that propaganda doesn't even need to be thought of being used, then where can we run to? Where else in the world are rights and freedoms protected, not granted by the government, but protected, enforced, recognized, not permitted, but unalienable? Where do those of us who simply want to live the same way that our founding fathers had intended for us, where do we go to when this singular and entirely individual nation falls more than it has already? Welcome to Desert Gulag, comrade. Here we put all enemies, both political and personal, simply because they threaten to undermine political agenda and, of course, provide free-thinking voice we do not want to tolerate. When you dare to speak out against the established order, those who can use their power and wealth to deplatform you, to discredit you, to remove your ability to provide for yourself and your family, they will. Now, they won't kill you. No. That would make you a martyr. And martyrs are far more influential after their deaths than they could ever have been before that. Instead, when they take control and make their presence public, they will keep you alive just to break you, mind, body, and soul. They want you to know that you have failed and that you could have seen it coming, if only you had paid more attention to what was happening around you and done something about it sooner. Only after these radical progressives and their anarchistic weapons have torn down the structures that allowed them to flourish in the first place, all in some great revolution that they believe is possible, and a utopia that, by definition, cannot ever exist, has begun to take form, only then will they finalize their goals, which end in the everlasting destruction and revolution of a people towards a system that is inherently more hedonistic, debaucherous, and destructive, and that acts as a guiding principle to be controlled by those who want nothing more than complete servitude to their system. We move full force to the culmination of over a decade of work on Bain's plan as all pieces fall into place. Kidnapping the board of directors of Wayne Enterprises, Bain takes the reactor and turns it into a bomb with a fuse that's 6 months long. Blowing the tunnels, the bridges, and all communications, Gotham is absolutely alone in its despair. Over just the last 2 years, we've seen scenes time and time again of the destructive authoritarian principles of the left, from Chaz, or I guess Chop, which sounds even worse in comparison, to, the time that Antifa and BLM rioted in DC over a year before a certain group of people went to a certain Capitol building. From Seattle to San Francisco, from Chicago to Kenosha, it started, and everyone is too afraid of being canceled for having moral fiber to do anything about it or call it out for what it is. Even the President of the United States, and I mean in the movie, but watch the movie. It's kind of eerie. Even the President of the United States is unwilling to do anything to help save these people, rather saying the opposite of what he means, playing his cards safe and hoping that it all blows over one day. Now, of course, Bane begins his manifesto to Gotham in front of both a courthouse and a prison, symbols of establishment and traditions which he personally deems corrupt and evil, and that the people in these systems are victims, not criminals who committed heinous actions to put them there. It's a very well-made, very flourishing speech that I suggest any would-be dictator should take notes on. The next act of the film begins by showing us the aftermath of the Great Revolution in Gotham. Its wanton destruction, its anarchy, its death. We see Selena questioning the choices that led her to this point. As the POV American socialist of this film, we finally do see her question those beliefs of hers. If the logic of tough times make strong men holds true anywhere, this act of the movie is the perfect example. Over the majority of this act, we get the chance to see Jim, Blake, and the rest of the police insurgents against Bane go under the radar, making sure to keep out of sight of Bane's army while simultaneously preparing to undermine that same regime. Now, while there's not much politically to say at this point, if you've been paying attention this long, you understand the roles that each character plays and the gist of the politics of this film. Of course, while the majority of this act is simply used to accelerate towards the conclusion of the film, we do get a singular chance to see how court proceedings work. With the look of a French Revolution-era courtroom, Scarecrow presides as judge and jury, doling out sentences to those already deemed to be guilty. If ever there were a more perfect expression of what it is to be cancelled by Twitter and thrown off of every mainstream media platform than watching a crowd of people scream, "Death! Death! Death!" to someone who they don't like for being a person of influence, then please show me, because this is kind of the perfect example. As Gordon points out, it has absolutely nothing to do with justice. It is simply power and mob rule. With Bruce's rise and return, hard times restoring this strong man, Selina, for the first time in months, sees hope for a hopeless city. With another bargain, but now with proof of the clean slate's existence, Selina is given a chance to redeem herself, to help Bruce and free herself from the shackles of the past. With the police preparing for the last stand of Gotham's finest, we see the barbarous army of Bane threaten death or dispersal, again hammering home the point of hypocrisy from a man who expressed liberation and mostly peaceful protests as virtuous acts that should be honored, not demonized. Finally, finding Bane's weakness, Bruce tries to remove Bane's N95 mask that filters an aerosol version of the RNA vaccine into his system. You see, Bane has such a weak immune system that after wearing that thing for the last 2 years, his body is not physically capable of processing open-air environments. Bruce threatens to remove the mask, of course, but Miranda ends up tricking him and turns out to be a liberal leftist, stabbing Bruce and readjusting the mask to make sure that he can continue to social distance safely. However, of course, the detonator ends up not working, but the guns and the bat pods certainly do, and after a great chase scene, Talia, Miranda, dies, still spouting off her ideological dribble and unable to process the fact that she has already lost. Following this, and after having a really hot, if not also really time-wasting makeout session, Bruce and Selina part ways, with Bruce finally telling Gordon who he is in the most roundabout but somehow emotional way possible. A new day has dawned, the night has ended, and its champion disappeared, never to return. Probably. The finale of this film gives us hope that the current world we're living in can, must, and of course will get better. It serves as a message in one sense that this system cannot last, but also that a more vigilant, more perfect union can rise one day. If we act soon, we may even be able to avoid the teething season of that new and better future. But of course, none of this is possible if we don't take the time to recognize the problem for what it is. Complete and utter immolation of our institutions for the sake of progress. We need to take the time now to work together with our brothers, with our sisters, with our friends, with our neighbors, to figure out how to dig ourselves out of this hole that we've allowed ourselves to be put in. And if we don't do it soon, we're going to suffocate when it fills. Dear Lord, that was certainly a journey, wasn't it? Again, I would like to reiterate that I personally don't care if you agree with me on every point or not. I don't even need you to agree with me on a singular point. This was something that I just realized one day and felt compelled to create as a video, or I guess in this case as a podcast. Thank you, Warner Brothers. And if you disagree with absolutely everything I said in this, that's perfectly fine. I welcome you just the same as I would people who agree with everything I said. make sure to leave a comment on your thoughts about this film, what messages you take from it, and of course, whether or not you think I'm just some sleep-deprived madman whose brain is slowly melting as he speaks. It's actually not the wildest thing I've heard. If you did in fact enjoy my work, please make sure to subscribe, to turn on notifications. Again, I'm not expecting that this video will get monetized, even though being in audio production, it should, but that's thanks to YouTube and Warner Brothers doing what they do best. I mean, what did you expect? If you'd like to make sure I can continue to dedicate large amounts of time like this to making a video, please make sure to head on over to my Patreon. It costs less than a coffee, as I've said already. And please go to cnp-productions.com/store and get yourself a t-shirt, a baseball shirt, or a sticker sheet with 20 stickers. Of course, I release new designs in men's and women's shirt sizes alongside 20-count sticker sheets with each consecutive video, and personally, this is one of my favorite designs that I've made, and I'll certainly have to get one for my brother and I to wear. As I did say in the ad break, I meant to get the Christian Neises show started in February, but with my birthday on the 12th, with my brother's on the 16th, and a pile of mass communications and photography homework, I've been lucky to find the time even for this video. And of course, finding footage to put into this that isn't downscaled into oblivion and isn't going to destroy my potential ad revenue is a challenge enough. However, the inaugural episode of the Christian Neises show is going to be me building a new PC for work and gaming. A birthday present to myself. I've actually needed to upgrade my system for well over a year at this point, with, my GPU bottlenecking my CPU. That's a story I'll probably tell on the Christian Neises show, so I'll just go into it there. I'll certainly make sure to send out an announcement ahead of time to all of you out there, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you all, so please make sure you call in when the phone line goes live. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. At the time I had finished writing this, it was almost 1 a.m. and we were over 6,800 words in, and at the time that I'm recording this, now 2 days later, it's 6:42 p.m. and I've been recording since 4:30. Anyway, next month, I step into the world of true crime, of decades of murder, and a trail, or rather, a highway, of bodies. I'll see you all then. I will actually have footage then, so, of course. Anyway, I'll see you all then. Same bat time, same bat channel. Have a good one.